that is a boot. Here's the other. And just in case, here is Bondi's boots, Flight Sergeant Bondi's boots that I am polishing very slowly. Boot polishing is one of the early staples of Air Cadets, where it's very much a statement of dominance over other cadets, as boot polishing is, well, quite the difficult and intense task, as oftentimes during parades your boots will not be up to standards. And that is a terrible feeling, because more often than not, next week your boots are going to be in bad condition, because it is not easy to polish boots. So this will try and teach you the ins and outs of boot polishing in hopefully less than 15 minutes. So the first big thing is materials. This Kiwi brand. They grind up kiwis and turn it into shoe polish. Make sure it is black shoe polish, as your boots are black leather. Inside, there's a tab. Well, that's on the outside. But inside, you will find this mysterious black solid. That is your polish. Alternatively, at some summer camps, they may sell you some weird off-brand shoe polish, which is still fine. It does the job, but it's just a little stranger, I would say. It's kind of odd. And then, of course, this in the end is what you want to end up with. It is Kiwi Parade Gloss. That is the important one. Although it does have a habit of drying up very quickly, so you'll have to replace it every so often, but I don't completely have a need for Parade Gloss yet. You can accomplish a really good shine with just regular polish. And remember, always seal them after, because they dry out a lot. Kiwi also sells this very nice cloth. It's very good, and it's specially designed for polishing, because the last thing you want, of course, is a terrible cloth. I would very much recommend buying a cloth, and I would very much recommend buying Kiwi shoe polish. If you think you can use like one of those cloths, be warned, because, well, you see these like lines? If you fill this cloth with polish, then wipe it off, there's going to be lines left on the boot. And if you're going for that final shine, it will ruin that shine. And if you think, oh, well, I can use one of these, definitely. Well, it's a real big shame. Watch this. See, look what that did. Nothing. That's the issue. Always use the right cloth. That's pretty much it. Now that you have the 3 essentials of polishing, that is polish, water, and the cloth, you take the cloth, you find a nice clean spot, you usually put it around one finger. I use my index finger. You twist it so that you have a flat surface. You can kind of pinch it at the edges to make sure it is flat. And that is your polishing surface. So now, it doesn't really matter what order you put water or polish on it. I usually do water and polish, and even more often I use spit and polish. However, I find that's a bit too graphic for this video. So I usually get some water. Like you can see, I have a little bead. I want a bit more. You can see it's actually wet now. And in the polish, you just wave it around. And you acquire a little bit of polish. And now you can see the shiny toe, and you can see it get applied and make it not shiny anymore. That is good. It is now applied. And then you just simply keep on going. This will probably take a couple minutes to get all the polish off if you've gone for a big scoop. And it just goes, and if at any point during the process you need a bit more water, you can get a bit more water for it and just keep it a bit wet so that it's easier to polish. And you just keep on going. Polishing technique is as simple as small circles, keep them as small as possible. It just keeps the polish together, builds up a bit of heat, and that heat spreads out some more of the polish. So you just keep on making little circles. And gradually, you're going to get less and less polish on this as it kind of disperses. And you will be left with, hopefully, a nice smooth surface. So now I would say that is nicely shined. It's not the best because you can still see that there's some like polish and scratches just from the cloth. But as we look closer, you can see all of these little tiny imperfections. Like that there is a flake of polish from this part of the boot that's being washed over here. For that, you can probably pick it off, although that'll leave a scratch that you'll have to polish out again. But it's much better than having a little tiny dimple. And then you have little imperfections like that, which is caused by a wonderful thing called hair. You'll need to scratch that off as well. And what you're left behind with is something we often call boot cancer, which is a little tiny mark on the boot that just ruins the polish. Like that right there is bare leather because we've ended up scratching all the polish off. So that's why it's important to have a very nice cloth that does not have hair in it and does not scratch the boot. Another part of boot maintenance is the crack of the boot right here. As soon as the boot bends, it cracks the polish off. If you don't brush off the stuff that cracked off, like you can see there's some on it, if you don't do that and you just start polishing, you're going to get those little bumps we saw on this boot earlier that we had to scratch off. So usually you can take your cloth, but you might get it covered in those little tiny specks of polish. So that's why sometimes you see very large, very pointless, over-engineered polishing brushes that just kind of, that's all they do. They just take those specks off and the hair off. Your boot comes in several different sections. That is the sole of the boot, the toe, the sides, the heel, the tongue, and the lace. One thing you're supposed to do with boots is you're supposed to blacken the outside. You properly do this by perhaps finding a toothbrush, which I should have in here. It is unfortunately covered in completely hardened polish. But you get some polish off this. You can see it built up on the side. And you then blacken the sides of your boots. If you had, say, dust or salt or just whatever weird stain is on the side of your boots, if you blacken it, it puts that stain away. With your boot, when you get it, it starts off as bare leather. This is basically straight from the cow with a little tiny coating and a little tiny polish, tiny amount of polish to keep it from cracking. This leather does not have a flawless surface. If you were to polish the leather, it would look shiny, but it would not look polished. Then, let's say you have filled in all the cracks of the boot, you have made it very, very smooth, but it's dull. In order to make it not dull anymore, you would polish that surface with only a little tiny bit of polish. So keep in mind that your boot needs to be polished. In order to be polished, it must be smooth and it must be shiny. So, to make this smooth, you have to make it smooth first before you can shine it. You do what is called a base coat. A base coat involves usually just putting as much polish on as you can on a surface, smoothing it over a bit with your cloth, and then letting it dry. If you let it dry, the polish still fills in all the cracks, but this time when you go to polish over that, you'll actually be left with some polish on the boot. If you just put polish on the boot and then went right to polishing, you would shine your boot, but you wouldn't make it smooth. A base coat involves this process about 5 or 6 times, where you put polish on, let it harden, and just wipe anything left off. So you just repeat this until you have a nice smooth surface. Stringing the boot. And the interesting thing about stringing parade boots is they don't crisscross, they're actually horizontal, one above the other. So first, find the halfway point of your lace. You're going to want to string both ends through and try and keep that point in the middle. Parade boots, you only want to have the horizontal pieces showing. So any movement you do is done under this part. So we start by stringing this side up through the boot. This one, you go over the boot to the second hole. This one, You then pull above the other, so this is the opposite lace. And then this one goes over and under. Once you get to the top, you'll find out one string left that doesn't go through a hole, and the other one that does have a hole. So what I do here is I draw the second one up through the top hole so that we have two strings coming from the same hole. Once there, we can then tie a reef knot. And what you want to do with the access bits is you just want to put them back in the boot, tucked away. With that ends the polishing of the boots.